Thank you, everyone, for coming today. My name's Hudson Davis. I'm with PrevTech. And PrevTech is a company that grew out of the stray voltage space. It essentially started as a stray voltage company, and that's why I think we're covering two topics today, which is bringing electrical peace to the farm through, one, solving stray voltage, and as a result of that, also bringing electrical fire prevention. The story behind stray voltage, which I'll start with, is really a story of electricity increasing its presence on farms. You know, farms that got more and more complicated. I talked to a guy earlier today, he's 55 cows, and he's looking at putting in robots. Well, as soon as you increase the complexity of the electrical infrastructure, that infrastructure has to be powered by electricity, which wants to flow everywhere. It's a really dangerous beast. That's why we put it in insulation. That's why we have people with degrees in how to manage it. It gets very complicated. And as you increase that complexity in an environment that is very intense, humid, full of sulfur, ammonia, all these things that like to wear down on your environment, well, you're increasing the odds of something chaotic happening. Stray voltage is a part of that story. I've been on farms where people had someone with like little clothes hangers walking around trying to find stray voltage just because they didn't understand what was going on, so they're literally reverting to witchcraft. And our team's experience over 30 years, starting as AgriVolt, now as PrevTech, was making that simple and digestible and allowing you to actually fix it. Here's some examples of a lot of issues. You see, you know, worn wires, a mouse chewing on a wire. I've seen a guy run the neutral line for his lights, and as he secures that to his wall, his metal building, it nicks some of that insulation. Well, now that building is a part of the path of that electricity because that neutral is actually touching. And so he had like an amp of neutral power coming back all the way back to the main panel. Electricity is a big loop, and it always wants to get back to the main panel, and as soon as you jeopardize that loop, you have some stray voltage, and these are examples of that. The reason, again, we're going into fire prevention is because these things left unattended can eventually cause a fire. They can generate heat, and there's a lot of things that can burn on a dairy. You also get stray voltage from the utility. Now, this is where it kind of gets witchcrafty. I think the next video I'll show you helps describe what the effect is of the utility using you as a path for dirty power or dirty stray voltage, dirty currents coming back to the substation. When your farm with a lot of metal is in that path and you're neutral from the utility and your ground on the dairy are connected, well, now that can charge your whole facility with this minor stray voltage. Humans aren't going to feel it usually, but when you have a wet environment and you have a ton of metal everywhere and barefooted animals, they're susceptible to it. And here's a good video to exemplify that fault. If it works. We'll see. There you go. You got some poultry birds. They're just hanging out, having the time of their life. And then all of a sudden, they are not hanging out, having the time of their life. They're dancing. They're suddenly under stress. Even though this is a dairy convention, I like this video because it just makes sense. You look at it, you're like, yeah, those birds shouldn't be doing that. They should be calm, relaxed, drinking water, eating food. What happened here is this barn was about to shut down. They were losing money over 2 years, and we put in a system to monitor, the AgriVolt system, and what we found is the utility was dumping stray voltage into the facility, and it was tied in to what his neighbors were using. So his neighbors would use more power. All of a sudden, the draw locally gets higher, and his facility becomes a part of that path, creating chaos for the birds, and the birds are now not gaining weight like they should. They're basically static or below the weight gain they should be so that the farmer's losing money. We put in a blocker, basically a check valve. To be honest, I don't fully even understand how it works, but it acts like a check valve for that neutral line from the utility so that up to, I think it says right here, yeah, up to 30 volts, that stray voltage cannot come onto the grounding system on the farm. We remotely monitor these. We make sure that they're always working, but as soon as we put this in, within 2 weeks, that whole facility turned around. The birds were happy again. They're eating, they're excited, and they didn't have to close it down, which was really nice. Our team likes to stress that it's not witchcraft, even though I've had to bang my head against the wall to understand it, ask ChatGPT, spend many hours arguing with ChatGPT, and then my technical team trying to understand the nuance of it. It's not magic. It's just electricity is super complicated. I mean, to think about electricity is like a magnetic field. It's like, okay, well, some guys, for example, a neutral run on a big pig facility, you might have multiple panels with one neutral, and everyone thinks that's fine, but that one neutral line is now taking the load from multiple panels, and you're maximizing the amount. I mean, you're overloading that one piece of electrical equipment that's creating a larger magnetic field that creates this opportunity where it's running by something metal, and now that larger electromagnetic field can dump into the metal in the building and shock your animals. Basically, you've got water in a big pipe, and the electrical system is that pipe, and it's looking and just hungry for somewhere it can just burst out. And it's really easy to have bursting points and not recognize it. And you can think of the cows basically like your wet tongue and a 9-volt battery. Take that 9-volt battery, put it in your thumb, and you're not going to get anything exciting happening. Put it on your tongue, well, that's wet. It's fleshy. And now you got a cow in a barn with wet feet licking up some water, and, well, that water was a path for some of that leaking electricity on the facility, whether it's coming from anything. There's a lot of places it can come from. I've even heard of a cathode from a natural gas utility was underneath a dairy. And so they send out these little shots of electricity, and every time they would send out those shots, it would jump into the metal building and shock all the animals when they're sending out that cathode shot to make sure there's no leakage in the natural gas line. So it can come from a lot of different sources. So what happens to the cow? They get nervous, tail movement, trampling, kicking. We had a dairyman put in our system, and he discovered that cows don't kick every time they go in the milk parlor. He just thought that's the way they acted. He thought that that's just cows, that's just how they are. And he blocked that stray voltage, he fixed some problems, and boom, the cows were calmer, and he saw milk production increase. You'll also see hesitancy to drink water. Just generally all the things cows should be doing. They should be happy, they should be eating, they should be relaxing. But when they're stressed and they're getting shocked, well, they're not happy, they're not relaxing. I worked in a building that every time I would touch a certain doorknob, I would get a little shock. Well, guess what? I didn't enjoy touching that doorknob. I avoided it. If I could, I'd wear a long sleeve. I don't know why it was there. It could be stray voltage. I have no idea, but it was just really annoying. And that's the cow's experience. So how do we fix this wandering, bursting, mysterious stray voltage? Well, we try to make it simple. And the way we do that is we put electrical monitoring on each of the panels. The feed's going into the panel, and that allows us to see from that panel, now continuously, as soon as we put that monitoring in, we can see, here's this panel A. Panel A is leaking 50 milliamps. 50 milliamps, we're not too concerned about. 500 milliamps, okay, well, let's look into what's going on there. We can see it remotely because of this little monitoring device. And what that monitoring device is doing, it's saying, this closed loop of electricity, 100% that goes out and is coming back, should be coming back. As soon as a little falls off, the amount that falls off we can detect because it creates like a, I don't know what the correct term is, an imbalance in our current transformer that our current transformer is picking up. Don't know if that made sense, but basically it's like a 10-gallon water jug. If electricity is a big 10-gallon thing of water, and you're running water through this loop, well, if you're starting to see a slow decrease in the water going down, clearly there's a hole in that loop. And our CTs tell you, hey, this is how much water you're leaking per minute, essentially. That's one way to understand it. So after we fix everything on farm, and we know all of the stuff on farm has been fixed, those little mouse chews or the VFDs that are dumping stray voltage or high frequency noise into the environment. Once all that's fixed, we put another monitoring point on the connection with the utility to see if they're actually the ones pushing it onto you. And so we don't start there because that costs you 12, 15 grand to block that. Well, we don't want to jump there. We want to minimize cost and give you a sustainable solution. So fix everything on farm, and then see if the utility is causing a problem. And only then do you block the utility from pushing that stray voltage onto you. And that's worked great. That was the mission of AgriVolt, to systematically tackle stray voltage. We did that since 1995. We have these sweet boxes, things that block noise from VFDs, block the stray voltage from the utility, and a permanent monitoring solution. But AgriVolt had a problem. The problem is we had 50% of our clients leaving those boxes on the wall. They were forgotten. They cleaned up the baseline problems, and then they're like, okay, great. But there's this box that's blinking on the wall, and no one cares. It just is there. And then they call us 3 years later and like, hey, we've been having problems. And we look at the unit, and it's been ignored for 2 years, and there's been a consistent fault that whole time. And so we knew that wasn't good enough. That was going on, and the utilities called, or insurance companies told us, we've got facilities burning down, and we've also noticed that the customers you take care of from a stray voltage standpoint that really pay attention are really doing a good job. I don't know why it's starting to skip ahead without my control. But the people that pay attention to stray voltage cleaned up their networks. The facilities were safer. They were cleaner. And so we were like, okay, that's interesting. Let's go ahead and make these smartphones. Let's make them really smart and remotely talk to you. The only problem with that is everybody's equipment gives you an alert now. What does 1 amp mean? Nobody cares. Nobody knows. You get a 1 amp fault at 11 o'clock at night, you ignore it. So we have a bunch of French Canadians in Canada that their mission is to reduce the risk of electrical fire. So AgriVolt actually has been bought by PrevTech. PrevTech grew out of AgriVolt, became so big that it bought AgriVolt. And now we stop fires with awareness. We have a bunch of French Canadians, 14 guys that are watching our 2,000 clients continuously. And let's say tonight, one of our guys has a fault for 1 amp all of a sudden out of nowhere. Well, a French dude is going to call that guy and say, hey, you better get into your barn, and figure it out. Because if you don't, you might have this fire. And this is actually an example of that. That was 2 or 3 years ago, 11 o'clock at night. A dairyman in Canada ignored 2 calls. Third call, RCO calls him, get into your barn right now. When he went in there, his motor was on fire. So he was able to stop that fire from escalating. If you want his phone number, he's very happy to talk to people about our products. He loves it because we help stop the place from potentially burning down. So we moved from taking the responsibility away from the client to fully understand the product to our team taking ownership of it. And that's resulted in last year, we had 1,850 clients. And across those clients, we basically had 10 or 12 cases per client per year where our team is actually on the phone with them, engaging and helping solve a problem. So far this year, I think we've stopped at least 3 or 4 of our clients, of those clients from their facilities burning down, of active fires beginning that we alerted them to go and pay attention to something, and they did, and they stopped it from escalating. One of the things I want to point out is when you solve stray voltage, well, you get rid of a ton of baseline issues. And so, 3 or 5 out of 2,000 clients isn't that impressive, but we're also taking care of a ton of baseline issues. So who knows what that problem would have been if, what those numbers would have been if they weren't being proactive. I'm going to skip this video. It's another dairyman. He really likes us. He put it in, solved a bunch of baseline issues. 3 months later, this fault popped up at 5 in the morning. It was a connection, I think, to a fan, and it was smoking. He got a text alert. About 20 minutes later, he got a call from us, and he had already visited the equipment and solved it from escalating and just becoming a worse issue. He also loves our product. If you want his phone number after this, I can give it to you. We'll see things like extension cords burn out, other interesting photos of equipment just wearing, and there's a point in the life of this equipment where it has this insulation that is wearing out, and as that wears out, you have the potential for that electricity to leak, and when it leaks, it creates heat, and that can create fire. These pictures are all fun to look at, but 99% of the time they don't look this fun or interesting. They're pretty boring, actually. It's screw in the wall, it's a loose connection, it's wire that's just stretched too tight, or a mouse chewing on something. We once had a snake crawl into a panel and like bite 2 points and fry up. And so our theory, our mission, and the way we manage stray voltage starts with awareness and then stopping that problem at the source. And our system makes it actually really easy to stop the problem at the source. Here's an example of a dairy. The first dairy I closed, I've only been doing this for, I don't know, 11 months now. But the first place I closed, we installed it, and every single night, he had this ramp up all of a sudden of 340 milliamps of stray voltage dumping. And it was really hard to find, and that was the neutral line secured to the wall, and the insulation was worn. So every time they turn on the lights at night, it starts creating a problem. We have talked to guys that have tried to solve their stray voltage problem, and they'll bring a consultant out that starts monitoring stuff, and then the guy walks away, and, well, the problem appears after the guy leaves. And so we don't even visit. We just install the equipment so that all of the electrical infrastructure is continuously monitored. We used to do it in person. We found that was too cumbersome, too costly, and this allows us to bring the cost down and remotely be intelligent. And now this guy can walk up to panel 6, he can pull it open on his phone live and have a reading saying, and one, he's also going to go out there when the problem's occurring, right? So you're also not wasting trips to the dairy. He's going to see 380 milliamps. He's going to flip each breaker, and this is what he did. Flip each breaker, and he'll see it drop to 0 eventually. As soon as he sees it drop to 0, he knows that that breaker is the source of the problem, flips it back on, calls a bunch of French Canadians, and walks down the line with their assistants on the phone to help him diagnose that problem. Because of that level of detail and approach to the problem, it makes it actionable. It makes it something that people can actually do and manage. It's not a box on the wall anymore. It's sustainable. So our peace of mind, we believe, comes from bringing that awareness or solving things at the source and then taking action. No more boxes on the walls. No more witching for your stray voltage. Continuous monitoring that's actually smart with a team that understands it. We also put temperature probes into the panels on our dairies or swine or poultry or whatever. I did a furniture building on the East Coast. They're building furniture and they wanted some fire prevention. So we can see if the temperature gets above 120 or 130 in that box, you get an alert and say your panel's heating up. Well, maybe you get over there and stop a panel from burning down, which is such a pain. Look at all those wires you'd have to replace if that thing melted. Super, super annoying. I don't like it. Sorry, I had to do one little drum place. We had a brand new SAL unit. They had temperature readings in all of their panels. And on a Sunday, it jumped to 150 degrees. Our CEO called them, said, hey, you got to check it out. He went over there, and someone had installed the ventilation fan backwards. And so the room was just superheating. It wasn't getting any kind of ventilation, and that puts all of the hardware at risk. It just puts stress on the entire environment. And that's what our little PrevTech box looks like. It's about the size of my head. Pretty simple. Comes with its own little cell card, so we don't have to worry about the dairy's Wi-Fi being terrible. And each of our boxes can connect to 6 panels, and we have an expansion unit that allows it to go to 27. So we've really tried to create a solution that allows us to cover every dairy efficiently. We're not talking 50 or 100 or 300 grand. I am approaching people with a solution that's 6,500, 12,000, maybe 30 on a really complicated facility. But it's something that's actionable. You can do that. You're not going to crush them. Most of our interaction is not actually at the end of the day with the dairy. It's usually the electrician. So the dairy has his own electrician, and rather than flying the Canadians out, which are quite expensive, they like nice hotels and stuff like that, they're French, we use the local guys, local electricians, and they do it. Yeah, and it's pretty simple. You're unscrewing stuff, you take the hots and neutrals, you slide the CT through, make sure it's positioned right, and then you call the guys in Canada and say, are you receiving the signal? It's fairly simple. So one of the facilities, that first facility I closed, he had solved that problem with the lights at night. And then a couple weeks ago, this was really fun because I just randomly pulled up his site, and you can see every night this problem is just starting to develop. And so rather than waiting for negative effects on the animals, he can see a problem getting worse and know when it's occurring. That's what I love about the continuous monitoring. It's sustainable. It's not, if you work with me, your stray voltage problems are gone. That's not true. Facilities are wearing out constantly. That's just the way infrastructure works. You put in the continuous monitoring, and you can now have a relationship with that facility and make sure it's sustainably fixed. And that is the end. Yes, that's a common problem. Mm-hmm. Oh, well. Yeah, that's no bueno. So he's asking if mice are ever a problem. Well, anything that is going to tear out that insulation is a problem. And small kids that are bored, or a mouse, whoever it is that's chewing on it. My daughter would probably love to chew on some of these wires on these dairies. I wouldn't let her, but yeah. I try to keep my charger cables away from the little 9-month-old, but she is sneaky. Yeah, so basically per one of those boxes, it's after year one, it's like $100 a month basically, per box. You're covering the cost of the cell card, you're covering the cost of our remote monitor, the Canadians that want to eat and have families while also monitoring your facility. Yeah. What was that? No, I'm not sure how that all works out in the fine print, because obviously, I guess we're saying we're not guaranteeing your facility won't burn down. I mean, you can't do that. That'd be silly. Ground faults aren't the main cause of fires, and they might be the main cause of fires, but things are just going to pop up and chaos is there. What we're doing is trying to be preventative so that everybody is raising up the game and the baseline health of the industry is way higher. That's our goal. Our goal isn't to bring perfect peace. It's to raise that level of awareness. Yeah. Insurance companies love it. They push it pretty hard because consistently they've seen that the clients that put it in, their risk profile goes down, period. I mean, we put in a system and it wasn't even related to stray voltage. This guy had an ungrounded panel, which meant if something funky is going on there, someone could get electrocuted. That's a secondary benefit of just paying attention to your electrical system. Just putting in the system, making sure, is X, Y, Z in this way? Well, there is no ground. It's like, oh, well, that's a problem. We need to fix that. Now somebody didn't die, right? We can't prevent everybody from dying, but we can help a couple. We do the best we can. Oh, man. Yeah, that's tough. Any other questions?
How does the prospect, so there's a dairy that wants to put this in Wisconsin, let's say, do you travel to make that bid, or that bid's done virtually? Or
the bids are done virtually. I found when I was doing digester sales back in the day, it would almost always be an in-person meeting, but that's because these are massive projects. They, 100 plus pages of contract and negotiation. All I really need to know is the layout of the electrical system and make sure that we're covering everything on the site. And that is very efficient, allows us to keep our prices lower. And we used to do site visits all the time. But we've gotten to the place now where our team's good enough to be able to review it with the electrician and the client and just do it remote.
so you do the bid over email,
I do a video call, pull open the dairy, walk through the electrical layout, and then if I flub on that, well, we just send them more equipment. I mean, I've been tripping over myself trying to understand this fully, and as I've done that on a couple clients, I missed a couple CTs that they needed or another box somewhere else or too much equipment. Well, you just fix it. Just be really pragmatic, and everyone's been happy with that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a little awkward sometimes with the electricians because sometimes you'll find a problem that is persistent in the facilities they work on. Well, now they don't really want you looking at all of the stuff that they're doing, you know. That gets a little awkward. Any other questions?
Where are the majority of your U.S. clients? California?
Yeah, I've got because I'm from California, I have a lot of connection to the dairies there. We got a bunch of dairies out there, and then we have some dairies in like the South Dakota area, and I have like a lot of others that are right on the verge of saying yes throughout the whole U.S. We have some in New York that have already engaged and have the client in. From the AgriVolt side, they're all over the U.S., and some of them are converting to this model where they can remotely monitor. And yeah, and swine, you know, all over the place. Poultry, a smattering, Minnesota, some in California. It's kind of, it's a burgeoning process. So burgeoning as in we're bringing it to market, and it's slowly sprinkling like a fire. Any other questions? You are a very good audience. I appreciate your time. There is a nice mug in the back for you, free of charge. There's a Stroop waffle in it if you're lucky. And thanks for coming.